Jamal sat quietly in the back seat of his mother's car, watching the city buildings pass by as they drove toward his new school. His mother, a hard-working nurse, had recently taken a better job in this city, which meant moving to a new home and starting over. For Jamal, this wasn't new. He had already changed schools twice in the past 5 years. He was used to walking into unfamiliar hallways, hearing whispers from curious students, and sitting alone at lunch until someone decided to talk to him. But this time, he didn't care about making new friends. He had one goal: focus on his studies and continue his martial arts training. For years, he had been practicing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai at a local gym. His father had enrolled him when he was just 10 years old, telling him that self-defense was not just about fighting. It was about discipline, confidence, and knowing when to walk away. Those words had stayed with him. As his mother pulled up in front of the school, she gave him a reassuring smile. "You'll do great, Jamal. Just be yourself," she said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Jamal nodded, grabbed his backpack, and stepped out of the car. He could already feel the stares from students standing near the entrance. New students always stood out, and he knew the drill. People would either ignore him or be curious about him. He walked into the building, following the signs to the main office. After getting his schedule, he found his way to his first class. The moment he entered, a few students turned to look at him. Some whispered, some just stared, and one boy sitting near the back smirked. Jamal ignored it and took a seat near the window. The day went by without much trouble. Some teachers introduced him to the class, while others simply told him to find a seat. During lunch, he grabbed a tray and sat alone at an empty table, eating quietly. That's when he noticed a group of students across the cafeteria, laughing and pointing in his direction. He recognized the boy who had smirked at him earlier. He was tall, with sharp features, and had the look of someone who enjoyed being in charge. Jamal pretended not to notice and kept eating. He had dealt with guys like this before. Loud, confident, always needing attention. They usually left him alone once they realized he wouldn't react. But something told him this time might be different. Later that day, in gym class, Jamal's instinct proved right. As he changed into his sports uniform, a few boys from the cafeteria walked past him, giving him side glances. One of them whispered something, and the others laughed. Jamal remained calm. He wasn't interested in unnecessary trouble. When the class started, the gym teacher announced they would be playing basketball. Teams were quickly formed, and Jamal ended up on the opposite team of the tall boy from lunch. It wasn't long before the boy started trying to show off, making unnecessary rough moves and bumping into Jamal every chance he got. At one point, Jamal was running toward the basket when the boy purposely shoved him hard. Jamal stumbled but didn't fall. He turned and locked eyes with him, but instead of reacting, he just walked back to his spot. The boy smirked again, as if he had won something. Jamal knew better than to let a little shove get to him. He had trained for years to stay calm under pressure. But he also knew something else. Guys like this never stopped at just one shove. And he was right. Jamal walked through the school hallway with his backpack slung over one shoulder, keeping his head down as he moved past groups of students chatting near their lockers. He had been at this school for only a few days, but he could already feel the stares and whispers whenever he passed by. He didn't care much about fitting in. He never had. But there was something about this place that felt different. Ever since that moment in gym class, he could tell that Kyle, the tall boy who had shoved him, wasn't going to let things go. Jamal had seen guys like him before, always needing to be the center of attention, always proving their strength by making others feel weak. The problem was, Jamal wasn't the type to react. And for someone like Kyle, that only made things worse. The next morning, Jamal reached his locker, only to find a small piece of crumpled paper stuffed through the vents. He pulled it out and opened it. "Watch your back, new kid." Jamal sighed and tossed the note into his bag without a second thought. He had trained for years, not just in fighting, but in discipline. His instructors had taught him that walking away from trouble wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. But he also knew something else. Bullies didn't stop when ignored. They only pushed harder. As he made his way to his next class, he noticed Kyle and his group standing near the lockers ahead. One of them whispered something, and they all laughed. Jamal didn't react. He had dealt with worse before. But as he passed by, Kyle suddenly stuck his foot out, trying to trip him. Jamal felt it coming before it happened. Years of training had sharpened his awareness. Instead of stumbling, he smoothly stepped over Kyle's foot, acting as if nothing had happened. Kyle frowned. "What's wrong, man? Didn't see that," he said, loud enough for others in the hallway to hear. Jamal stopped and turned slightly, meeting Kyle's eyes. His expression was unreadable, calm, controlled. He had no interest in getting into a fight, but he also wasn't going to act scared. "I saw it," Jamal said simply, then walked away. Kyle's friends snickered, but Kyle himself didn't laugh. His smirk faded as he watched Jamal leave without giving him the reaction he wanted. Lunchtime was no different. As Jamal sat alone, eating quietly, Kyle and his friends sat a few tables away, throwing glances in his direction. At one point, one of them grabbed an apple from their tray and tossed it across the cafeteria. It landed near Jamal's feet. Jamal didn't even look up. He finished his food, stood up, and walked out of the cafeteria as if nothing had happened. This only frustrated Kyle more. The rest of the day went by with small, annoying encounters, shoulder bumps in the hallway, whispers, laughter. But Jamal didn't let it bother him. He had learned long ago that reacting only gave bullies power. But as the final bell rang and students flooded out of classrooms, Jamal could sense something different in the air. He noticed Kyle and his group standing near the back exit of the school, whispering among themselves. They weren't just trying to annoy him anymore. They were planning something. Jamal took a deep breath and adjusted his backpack. He had spent years training to defend himself, but he always hoped he wouldn't have to use it outside of the gym. Still, if Kyle and his friends wanted to start something, they were about to learn a lesson they'd never forget. Jamal walked down the school hallway, heading toward the main exit. He could feel the weight of the stairs behind him, but he didn't turn around. He already knew who was watching, Kyle and his friends. He had seen them whispering, exchanging glances, and nodding toward the back doors. It wasn't hard to figure out what was about to happen. He tightened his grip on his backpack strap and kept walking. His mother was working late, so he didn't have to rush home. He had planned to stop by the gym for training, but now it looked like he had something else to handle first. As he stepped outside, the warm afternoon air hit his face. Most students were already gone, either heading to the parking lot or walking home. But near the side of the school, in a quieter area behind the gym, Kyle and his friends were waiting. Jamal sighed. He had tried to ignore them. He had given them no reason to keep bothering him. But bullies like Kyle didn't need a reason. They just needed someone to make an example of. Kyle stepped forward, arms crossed over his chest. His usual smirk was there, but there was something else in his eyes, something more serious this time. His friends stood behind him, forming a half circle. Jamal quickly counted. 4 of them. "Man, you really think you're better than everyone, don't you?" Kyle said, shaking his head. "Walking around all quiet, acting like you're too good to talk to people." Jamal stayed silent. He had learned long ago that words didn't mean much to people like Kyle. They weren't looking for a conversation. They wanted a reaction. Kyle took a step closer. "You know, I was just gonna mess with you a little, but you keep ignoring us. That's disrespectful, man." Jamal raised an eyebrow. "Not reacting isn't disrespect." Kyle's smirk twitched. His friends chuckled behind him. One of them muttered, "Ooh, tough guy." Jamal wasn't trying to act tough. He was simply telling the truth. But Kyle wasn't the type to listen. "You got 2 choices," Kyle said, rolling his shoulders. Either you apologize for acting like you're better than us, or, he cracked his knuckles, we teach you a lesson. Jamal exhaled slowly. He had hoped it wouldn't come to this. He really had. He didn't enjoy fighting outside of the gym, and he never started trouble. But at this moment, he knew there was no avoiding it. Kyle wasn't going to walk away. His friends were watching. If Jamal backed down now, it would never end. He dropped his backpack to the ground. Kyle's smirk grew. That's what I thought. Jamal shook his head. You have no idea what's about to happen. Kyle frowned for just a second, just long enough for Jamal to see the doubt flash in his eyes. Then, like flipping a switch, Kyle lunged forward, swinging a punch. Jamal saw it coming before Kyle even moved. Years of training had made it second nature. His body reacted before his mind even had to think. He shifted to the side, dodging the punch effortlessly. Before Kyle could recover, Jamal stepped in and delivered a precise body shot, his fist landing just below Kyle's ribs. Kyle gasped, stumbling back. His friend's laughter instantly stopped. Jamal didn't smile. He didn't taunt. He just stood there, ready. He wasn't trying to hurt anyone, only to end this as quickly as possible. But Kyle's pride had been wounded, and his friends weren't about to let him lose like that. The other three moved in. Jamal took a deep breath. They were about to regret this. Jamal stood still, his muscles relaxed, but his mind alert. He had trained for years, but this was different from the gym. There were no rules here, no referees to stop the fight, and no second chances. It was just him against four guys who thought they could intimidate him. Kyle was still holding his side, breathing heavily from the body shot Jamal had landed. His expression had changed. He wasn't smirking anymore. His eyes burned with frustration. He hadn't expected Jamal to fight back, let alone strike so fast and precise. One of Kyle's friends, a stocky boy with short hair, stepped forward. You got lucky with that one, he muttered. Let's see you handle all of us. Jamal didn't respond. Talking was a waste of time. He focused on their movements, watching for the first sign of an attack. It came fast. The stocky boy lunged at him, swinging wildly. His punch was sloppy, full of anger, but no control. Jamal sidestepped, letting the fist pass inches from his face. In one fluid motion, he grabbed the boy's wrist and twisted it, using his own momentum against him. The boy yelped as Jamal guided him forward, sending him stumbling to the ground. Before Jamal could fully reset, another attacker rushed in. This one was taller, quicker. He aimed a kick at Jamal's leg, trying to knock him off balance. But Jamal had trained for this. He lifted his foot just in time, letting the kick hit empty air. Then, with perfect timing, he countered with a swift elbow to the attacker's chest. The force sent him staggering backward, gasping for breath. The third boy hesitated now. He had just watched two of his friends go down in seconds. He looked at Kyle, waiting for direction. Kyle clenched his jaw, clearly embarrassed that things weren't going as planned. Don't just stand there, Kyle snapped. Get him. The last boy hesitated, but he had no choice. He rushed at Jamal, trying to grab him in a tackle. But Jamal was ready. As soon as the boy reached him, Jamal shifted his weight, hooked his arm under the attacker's shoulder, and used his own strength against him. With a smooth motion, he flipped the boy over his hip, sending him crashing onto the grass. The fight had lasted less than a minute, but it was already over. Three of Kyle's friends were on the ground, groaning, struggling to catch their breath. Jamal turned his gaze to Kyle. Kyle's fists were clenched. His face was red with anger and embarrassment. He had expected an easy fight, a chance to humiliate the new kid. Instead, he had been humiliated in front of his own friends. For a moment, it looked like Kyle might try to fight again. His pride wouldn't let him back down so easily. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had already lost. Jamal didn't move. He didn't gloat. He simply stood there, waiting. Kyle took a step back. then another. His hand slowly lowered. His breathing was still heavy, but now it was mixed with something else. Fear. "You're lucky," Kyle muttered, his voice quieter than before. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. His friends hesitated, but they followed, their heads low. Jamal exhaled slowly, letting the tension leave his body. He picked up his backpack and slung it over his shoulder. As he turned to leave, he noticed something. A few students had been watching from a distance, their eyes wide with shock and admiration. Whispers spread among them. Jamal shook his head and walked away. He hadn't wanted any of this, but now the whole school was about to know what had happened, and things were never going to be the same. The next morning, as Jamal walked through the school gates, he could already feel the difference. The whispers had started before he even reached the hallway. Students glanced at him, some nodding with respect, others staring in disbelief. He wasn't surprised. News traveled fast in high school, and after what had happened yesterday, there was no way to keep it quiet. As he reached his locker, two younger boys walked past, whispering excitedly. "That's him," one of them muttered. "The new kid who took down Kyle and his friends." Jamal sighed. He hadn't wanted attention. He hadn't asked for any of this. He had only defended himself. But now, people were looking at him differently. Some with admiration, some with caution. He kept his head down and focused on his books, hoping the day would go by without trouble. But trouble wasn't done with him yet. At lunch, as Jamal carried his tray to an empty table, he noticed a group of students watching him. This time, it wasn't Kyle and his friends. It was a different group. Older students, bigger than the ones he had faced before. One of them, a tall boy with a confident look, smirked as Jamal sat down. Jamal had seen that look before. It was the look of someone who had been at the top for a long time. Someone who didn't like the idea of a new name being whispered around the school. A few minutes later, the boy and his group walked over. The cafeteria grew quieter as students noticed. Even from across the room, Kyle sat at his table, watching closely. The tall boy pulled out a chair and sat across from Jamal. "So, you're the new kid everyone's talking about," he said, resting his arms on the table. His voice was calm, but there was something behind it. Something testing. Jamal didn't answer right away. He took a sip of his juice, then met the boy's gaze. "I guess so." The boy smirked. "You know, Kyle's been acting real quiet since yesterday. That's not normal. People like him don't just go silent unless something big happens." Jamal didn't react. He wasn't interested in more problems. The boy leaned forward slightly. "I don't know what kind of training you got, but around here, things work a certain way. You embarrass someone who's been in charge for a long time. That means some people aren't too happy with you right now." Jamal finally spoke. "I didn't start anything. I finished it." The boy's smirk widened. "I like you, man. You're different." He leaned back and stretched. "Name's Darius. And just so you know, I run things around here. Kyle, he was nothing. But me?" He tapped his chest. "I go blues." Jamal kept his expression neutral. He had no interest in getting involved in school drama, but he could see where this was going. Darius wasn't here to be friendly. He was here to remind Jamal who was in charge. Darius stood up. "You made a name for yourself. That's fine, but don't get too comfortable. Some of us don't like sharing the spotlight." He turned to his group. "Let's go." As Darius and his friends walked away, Jamal felt the weight of even more eyes on him. He had dealt with Kyle, but now he had attracted even bigger trouble, and he had a feeling this wasn't going to end as easily as last time. Jamal sat quietly at his lunch table, finishing his food as the cafeteria buzzed around him. But in his mind, he was already preparing for what was coming next. Darius had made it clear. He wasn't just another bully like Kyle. He was something more, someone with real influence in the school. And now he saw Jamal as a threat. Jamal wasn't afraid. He had trained too long, and too hard to be scared of someone like Darius. But he also knew that Darius wouldn't let things go easily. As the lunch period ended, Jamal grabbed his backpack and headed toward the hallway. He could feel the stairs again, but now they were mixed with something else. Anticipation. It was like the entire school was waiting to see what would happen next. By the time the final bell rang, Jamal was ready to leave. He had no interest in more fights, but he knew trouble had a way of finding him. And he was right. As he stepped out of the school building, he spotted Darius and his group standing near the side entrance, leaning against the wall. They were waiting for him. Jamal exhaled slowly, then adjusted his backpack strap. He had two choices: walk away and hope they didn't follow, or face whatever was about to happen head-on. He chose the second option. As he approached, Darius pushed off the wall and smirked. "I was hoping you wouldn't run," he said, crossing his arms. "That would have been disappointing." Jamal stopped a few feet away. "I don't run," he said calmly. Darius chuckled. "Good, because we've got a little problem. New kid." He gestured toward his friends. "See, after you embarrassed Kyle, some people started thinking maybe you're the toughest guy in school." He shook his head. "That's not how things work here." Jamal met his gaze. "I never asked for any of this." Darius nodded. "Yeah, but now you got it. And the only way this ends is if we settle it." He rolled his shoulders. "You and me. Right here. Right now." A small crowd had started to gather, students stopping to see what was about to happen. The air was tense, thick with expectation. Jamal didn't want to fight, but he also knew that if he backed down, it wouldn't end here. It would only get worse. He set his backpack down on the pavement and stood tall. "If that's what you want," he said, his voice steady. Darius grinned. "That's exactly what I want." Then, without warning, he moved. But Jamal was ready. Darius threw a fast punch, quicker and more controlled than Kyle's had been. He wasn't just some street fighter. He knew what he was doing. But so did Jamal. Jamal sidestepped, letting the punch miss by inches. In a flash, he countered with a sharp jab to Darius's side, making him grunt. But Darius didn't back off. He pivoted, swinging again. Jamal blocked it with his forearm and spun away, staying light on his feet. Darius was strong, but Jamal was faster. The crowd murmured in excitement as the two moved, testing each other. It wasn't like the fight with Kyle. This was different. This was a real challenge. Darius smirked, rubbing his side where Jamal had hit him. "Not bad," he admitted. "But let's see how long you last." Jamal stayed focused. He knew this fight wasn't over, and he was ready for whatever came next. Jamal kept his stance firm, his muscles loose but ready. Darius was different from Kyle. He was faster, stronger, and more experienced. But Jamal had spent years training, and he knew that strength alone didn't win fights. It was about control, speed, and strategy. Darius smirked and stepped forward, testing Jamal's reaction. Jamal didn't flinch. He had already analyzed Darius's fighting style. He was aggressive, always pressing forward, trying to overwhelm his opponent. That meant Jamal's best strategy was patience, waiting for the right moment to strike. Darius lunged again, throwing a quick punch aimed at Jamal's ribs. But Jamal twisted his body, letting the punch glance off harmlessly. In the same motion, he countered with a sharp kick to Darius's leg, making him stumble back slightly. The crowd around them gasped. Darius chuckled, rolling his shoulders. "All right," he muttered. "You've got some skills." He moved in again, this time with more focus. He feinted left, then came in hard from the right. Jamal barely dodged the hit, but he saw what Darius was doing, trying to wear him down. Darius had been in fights before, and he knew how to control the pace. Jamal took a deep breath and adjusted his strategy. He had been waiting too much, playing too defensive. It was time to turn the fight around. The next time Darius stepped in, Jamal didn't dodge. He met him head-on. Darius swung, but Jamal blocked it cleanly, then countered with a fast jab to Darius's chest. It wasn't a hard hit, but it was precise, forcing Darius to back up. Jamal pressed forward now, keeping his movements sharp and controlled. Another hit to the ribs, another quick step to the side, making Darius miss his next punch. The crowd murmured louder, realizing what was happening. Jamal wasn't just keeping up with Darius. He was winning. Darius's smirk faded slightly. He was breathing harder now, frustration showing on his face. He wasn't used to being outmatched. With a growl of determination, he threw everything into one last attack, hoping to end the fight in a single move. He charged forward, swinging with full power. But Jamal had seen this before. It was the same mistake Kyle had made, letting emotions take over. Jamal smoothly ducked under the wild punch, pivoted on his foot, and delivered a precise strike to Darius's side. Not too hard, not enough to injure, just enough to take the wind out of him. Darius gasped, stumbling backward. He caught himself, but his breathing was ragged now. His hands lowered slightly, and his eyes flickered with something new. Realization. Jamal wasn't just another tough guy. He was on a different level. The crowd went silent for a moment. Then whispers spread like wildfire. Darius wiped his mouth and looked at Jamal, something unreadable in his expression. Then, to everyone's surprise, he gave a short nod. "All right," he said, catching his breath. "I see it now." Jamal didn't respond, just waited. Darius sighed and took a step back, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm done," he admitted. "You got me." The crowd exploded into murmurs, shocked at what had just happened. Jamal relaxed slightly, his body still tense from the fight. He hadn't wanted this, but at least now, maybe it was over. As Darius turned to leave, he paused and glanced back. "You're different, man," he said. "I respect that." Then he walked away, his friends following behind him. Jamal stood still, feeling the weight of what had just happened. He hadn't just won a fight. He had changed everything. As Darius and his friends disappeared into the crowd, the energy in the air shifted. The students who had gathered to watch slowly broke apart, their whispers filling the hallway. Some still looked shocked, others excited. But one thing was clear: Jamal had earned their respect. Jamal sighed and picked up his backpack. He had never wanted to be the center of attention. He just wanted to go to school, train, and live his life without trouble. But now, whether he liked it or not, things had changed. As he walked toward the exit, a few students nodded at him. Some even gave him small smiles. It was a strange feeling. Just a few days ago, he had been the new kid, the quiet one no one paid attention to. Now, people saw him differently. Just before he stepped outside, a voice called out, "Hey, Jamal." He turned and saw Kyle standing near a locker, arms crossed. But his usual arrogance was gone. There was no smirk, no mocking tone. Instead, Kyle looked almost unsure. Jamal stopped but didn't say anything. He wasn't sure what Kyle wanted. For a moment, Kyle hesitated, then sighed. "Look, about everything before." He scratched the back of his head. "I was wrong." Jamal raised an eyebrow. He hadn't expected that. Kyle shifted uncomfortably. "I just thought. I don't know. That picking on you would be easy. That you wouldn't fight back." He looked away for a second, then met Jamal's gaze. "But you did. And you didn't just fight. You won." Jamal watched him carefully. Was this some trick? Some setup for another problem? But Kyle's face was serious. "I guess what I'm saying is, I respect you." Jamal didn't reply right away. He had spent years dealing with people like Kyle. He knew how fast things could change, but something about Kyle's voice seemed real. Finally, Jamal nodded. "All right." Kyle gave a small nod in return, then turned and walked off. Jamal stood there for a moment, letting everything sink in. He had expected trouble when he came to this school. He had expected to be an outsider, but now things were different. As he stepped outside, the cool air hit his face, and he took a deep breath. He knew this wasn't the end. There would always be challenges, always be people who tested him. But that was okay. He wasn't afraid of challenges.